My name is Daniel. I'm the CEO at White Shark Media. And I'm excited to be hosting this webinar today. We're going to talk about bidding strategies. We have some good material, some good slides coming up, and more importantly than the slides and the material that we're going to share, I am pleased to have Ed Leake with me today. Ed, thank you once again for joining us. Can you give us a little bit of an intro? Tell us a little bit more about you for those that may not know you yet.
I've done this so many times, I should really have an elevator pitch, shouldn't I? Yeah, so essentially I've been doing Google Ads for 15 years, managed a lot. I've lost track through the agency myself, consulting stuff. It's definitely north of 300 million, but then it sounds impressive, but when you've been doing it 15 years, it soon adds up. So yeah, bit of a nerd, started life building computers and then somehow ended up doing marketing and Google Ads, created a training product because I got fed up with people asking me questions, which is, I used to get bombarded with messages and emails. So I turned it into Gold Tier Ads. That was 4 years ago. So that's done very well. Agency does well. I thought it'd be a good idea to start a software product for Google Ads optimization. That's been a nightmare. What else? Oh yes, I do an agency group as well called Forge, which is currently locked because it's full, helping specifically PPC agency owners build, scale, and so on. But yeah, not much of a pitch, just a quick 30 seconds of me, really.
Yeah, that's perfect. Don't worry about it. We're here. We're going to be kind of tag teaming with one another, kind of going through these slides. We have a lot of material ahead, and I think we're excited to have you on board and sharing your knowledge with everyone today. So let's get right into it. I'm going to jump into some of the agenda that we have. So we're going to be talking about bidding. The first thing that we're going to talk about is just a little bit about the automated versus bidding strategy versus smart. For the most part, I would say most everyone today has already moved to smart bidding. So I would say there's still just a few scenarios where I could see a fit to do manual, but more often than not, we're already seeing everyone there. We'll go over just some quick news that we have in regards to ECPC, just a friendly reminder. And then we'll talk about, really what's the meat here is managing your automated bidding, how to align bidding to your goals. What are some of the practical tips on optimizing for your campaigns? And if you haven't already, how you could potentially transition from manual bidding and get some practical tips on that as well. And we'll share some of the success stories that we have seen, both Ed and I, with different situations where adjusting the bidding strategy and optimizing it really yielded some good performance across the board. So very excited to see what we have in for today. And let's jump right in. So let's talk about bidding, different options that we have. So if you're unfamiliar with it, we have a plethora of options for bidding, which have actually sort of reduced, right? I mean, if you go to the UI today, you can't quite select target CPA per se. You're sort of stuck with maximize conversions, but it's very similar. So you just do maximize conversions, set your target CPA, things like that. But so these are let's say I would say kind of the idea behind it is still there, but selecting the options not specifically there for some of these. And how would you define, a bidding strategy in general, like for our audience? Like what would be kind of a quick short bite of what that bidding strategy is supposed to do? Like, why is it important?
Well, let's have a look. You put me on the spot here. So I'm going to go down the list. Target CPA. So you've got data and conversion data coming into the account. So you can actually see how much your cost conversion is. So you set a target and you hope to hit it. ROAS is similar for e-commerce typically. And then you've got your two max attack versions of bidding. So you've got maximize conversions and maximize clicks, which are the destroyer of budgets. I joke, but I don't. So yeah, maximize conversions and maximize clicks they're both very useful in very specific situations. And I know this is only meant to be a very quick overview, but they can work if you're in if you control them with the budget, shall we say. Manual bidding, it's still a thing, just with sorry, Can
No
you still
worries.
hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Oh, it just said, sorry, it said my internet had gone. Oh,
But
I'm
no,
still
I
here.
got you.
Right.
You still
So
here? I got you.
it's
Don't worry.
sorry, I live on the side of a bloody mountain. I thought my internet had just dropped. I had a slight panic.
See, the bright side is I think it's probably very beautiful where you
It is beautiful, but the technology is a bit crap out here.
live.
Yeah, so manual CPC. So this is interesting. I did check the data before this. So we've got a few thousand accounts on AdEvolver, and it's around about 7% of people still use manual bids. So it's not a lot, but it's still, it's over 100 accounts. So people are still hanging on to manual bids. And then the others are very specific use cases like target impression, which you might use for your brand, for example. So yeah, you've got the more controlled brute force with the max clicks and conversions, and then manual, which is I don't want to let go of the tools essentially.
I'm a bit of a yeah, I'm a bit of a control obsessive sort of speak, right? I mean, a little bit, a little bit. If you're still on that, I would say that in the general sense, for those of you that are still kind of wondering which is the best, I will just start this webinar by giving you the right answer, and that is that there is no best bidding strategy. It's really going to be down to your goals, and not even your goals as a business, but your goals individually down to that campaign. Because for a lot of different businesses, you don't just have one main objective, you have multiple objectives you're trying to achieve through your different campaigns. So just kind of keep that in mind. And so we have a lot of options, but do not worry, we have a lot of answers for you in regards to where you can specifically pick for this. So again, this is just very similar to what we were just running through, which is a bit of a situational analysis on when you would use each of these specific bidding strategies. So again, what does a bidding strategy do? Just as a quick reminder to all of you that are viewers and are relatively basic on knowledge, the bidding strategy is going to determine how Google pushes and shows your ads. How does it determine whether your ad is going to show for a particular auction? So how does your ad go into the auction, and how much does it actually increase or decrease the bid that happens behind the scenes to determine whether it gets shown or not? So, and sometimes when you want to maximize, I would say that, let's say the top categories here would be if your goal is visibility, if your goal is traffic, if your goal is going to be based on lead generation, or if your goal is going to be basically on online sales. So depending on those, I would say those sort of cover the majority of the basis here. And that's what we're going to be showing you today, right? So let's just do a quick reminder, eCPC being deprecated. I guess, manual is still going to be there, but, maybe it doesn't really hurt to know that that's happening. So let's jump into some of the options here in regards to automated and smart bidding. So for the most part, I would say, how would you differentiate automated versus smart? I think it's very similar to a degree here, but what we're really trying to just say is that one is based on predictions, I would say, which is more like your max conversions and your maximized conversion value, for instance, whereas the other ones are more just sort of hands off in the sense that it's still relatively going to happen in an automated way, but it doesn't really do a lot of predictions behind the scene to determine, for instance, what would be the best case to show your ads. So again, if you're just trying to maximize clicks, Google is just trying to determine, well, okay, you're not going to tell me specific CPC bid. I'm going to manage that behind the scenes, but I don't really care if I get you conversions. I don't need to know a lot of the users or the context, etc. So just important to kind of keep that in mind. Whereas some of the other ones, like let's say conversion based or conversion value based options, are going to be more within that range. So does that sound like a good thing to say?
Yeah, I wouldn't get too hung up on automated versus smart. Essentially, smart
Yeah.
is using more, or Google tell us it's using more data points. We actually can't really verify it because we can't see into the black box. So for me, it's all automated bidding. Is it smart? Yeah. It's probably smarter than me as a computer. But yeah, I wouldn't get too hung up on the terminology because it's not even mentioned. I don't think it is in the UI I mean, you literally select your bidding. It doesn't say, do you want to do smart or automated? You choose a bidding strategy. So yeah, I wouldn't worry too much.
Right. Yeah. And I would say in regards to how these bidding strategies are going to affect, I would say just in general, understand that they're going to essentially just determine whether you're asking a show for a particular objective. So one thing that's really important here, I would say, just make sure you're tracking the right things. And so this is all down to objectives. And just remember, your marketing objectives really translate into what your conversion goals are going to be. So making sure you have the right conversion goals, I would say it's probably one of the best tips I can give you. Make sure you're very thorough with your selection, very thorough on what's primary, what's secondary, right, within the individual sort of account. And then even down to specific primary and secondary selection for specific campaigns, right? Because by default, you have your account level goals. So making sure you have your campaign specific goals is also kind of a nice little tip to help, the decision-making process on the ranking factors for visibility for bidding.
I think the majority of people
Yeah.
will have account level and they'll use a target CPA or target ROAS.
Yeah.
And a single primary conversion. I think that's the most people can get away with that pretty simple setup. And sometimes simple is best. If you're doing home services, for example, so your lead gen, you might just have a quote form, and that's your conversion, and you've got a target CPA, like super simple. And the same for e-commerce. It's the transactions what you want ultimately. I just wanted to broach this because I've seen too many people attempt to be fancy with a bidding system and use multiple secondary conversions, for e-commerce, or add to carts and this, that, the other, thinking that they're being smart, and they end up being more destructive. So it might sound super simple, but sometimes simple is where the performance is, to be honest.
Right. And it also makes the decision process a little bit simpler, a little bit easier, I would say. And I've seen people make the mistake of adding conversion actions, and to the point where they get duplicate conversion actions, so to speak, right? So they'll have like a click to call tracking, and then they'll also track the phone calls. It's like, why would you do that? And they leave them both as primary. So keeping simplicity in mind is definitely important for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about some of the goals that you can have. And I think I sort of broke them down, right? So like, do we want to have visibility, which I think sort of encompasses that online presence. And I would say, let's say you're running, what I'd like to do here is just sort of give some examples of campaigns and like where I've used them, I would say, for each of those individual scenarios. So let me give you an example. I like to use my target impression share, for instance, with some branding campaigns. Especially when the client has mentioned in a client brief, it's like, hey, I have these competitors and I know that these guys are bidding on my name. I know that they're doing it. They're doing those sneaky things. Let's say your brand is such and such, and then like Coca-Cola and Pepsi, they do that to one another all the time, where they're going to use their brand names, in their advertising. So I would say if that's the case, if that's the kind of situation do you deal with, target impression share is a really good option to make sure you're targeting that either absolute top or just top impression share percentage. You want to make sure your brand's showing there when they're searching for your keywords. And of course, if you want that to not get super crazy, again, depending on how much people search for that specific brand, you can obviously set a CPC bid limit. Make sure you don't go crazy with that. I saw an example once of somebody that paid, I think, almost close to $100 on one specific search, and I was like, whoa. But essentially, target impression share, that's going to be for visibility. You could use it for brand. I've seen it used a lot. It doesn't always have to be for brand. There's multiple examples where that's not the case, but you just have to keep in mind that it's not going to be influenced by conversions. So if you do that, don't expect it to have hypothetically best cost per conversion. It might just get away with it because in general, brand typically tends to convert better, I would say. But nevertheless, just sort of keep that in mind.
Yeah, it's sort of the bidding strategy that feels a bit frustrating because competitors are allowed to bid on your brand where target impression share can really fall apart, and it's similar to max clicks in this way. It's where your bid differential, so your min to your max in your search terms, is quite broad. So you might have a $5 min, and your max bids that you're seeing are like $50 or $100, and that's where the non-smart bidding options like target impression can fall apart, because they overbid and they spend really aggressively. But yeah, we've been in the same situation. Client kicking off because all our competitors are all over our bloody brand search term. What do we do? And it's essentially 100% target impression share to ensure that we're at the top. It's frustrating, but it can happen. Otherwise, I wouldn't use it really.
Yeah. I would
Yeah.
agree. I mean, I think looking at some of the data that we looked at internally, I would say we have a very small percentage of clients in target impression share, but it's certainly something that you can consider in those specific situations. So that's on the visibility component. Then I would say you have the traffic component, which would be something along the lines of your maximized clicks. I would dare say that, you could potentially use this if you have, I don't know, I'm trying to think of like a really, really good scenario for using maximized clicks.
Okay, hitting budget. So if you're in a market where you are competitive, so you're getting conversions, but you're struggling to spend you're hitting your budget and you can't spend any more. So no, I've said that the wrong way around. You're not hitting your budget. You want to spend more. Get it right, Ed. It's 3 o'clock. It's near my bedtime. So essentially, it's like, well, I've got 10 grand to spend or 20 grand to spend. I can only get to 5. It's like, okay, max clicks.
Yeah.
But again, where max clicks can unravel is it doesn't use the conversion data. So it doesn't really care. It's not selective. It's all the clicks, and not all the clicks are competitive for you. So it's a brute forces thing. I've seen it in industries such as insurance, highly competitive industries where they just want quote volume. They want these quotes coming in. And it's like, I don't care about CPA. I just want all the clicks because I'm a big company. I think for most smaller businesses and local businesses, it's probably not a great option unless you know how to use it in the very specific use cases.
Right.
Or you have narrow click costs again. So your min max clicks are in your search terms report aren't too broad, aren't too wide.
That's right. I would agree with that. You have some clients where they're like, oh, listen, we're going to run this this next couple months. We want to increase our budget. You obviously try that through the regular bidding strategy you already had. You don't really get to spend the budget, so you might be able to leverage this. I would also say it could potentially be relevant if you have timely events, I would say. So for example, if you have an event that you're trying to drive as much, kind of foot traffic as possible, whether that's foot traffic or just registrations or something like that. And again, the search terms are or not the search terms, but the keywords are relatively straightforward, and there's not really a lot of room for it to go wrong. I would say in situations like that, where again, you have a very time sensitive situation where you just need to allocate traffic. I would say that's where it can also really come in handy. I'm thinking of summer camps, for instance. If you get a late sign up from a client and they're just like, oh, we're starting in a couple of weeks or in a month, can you get me as much as possible? I was like, okay, let's go. So I would say in situations like that where there's a very specific deadline, you can maybe potentially use that. And so that's on the traffic side. I would say on the conversion side, I would probably, if I would be kind of teaching a class and I would be speaking to people, I would probably say break it down into whether you want to maximize just a number or if you're very much into purchases. And so I would say if you're lead gen versus e-commerce, I'd probably still do some sort of a separation between that. I have an interesting question for you. So for the clients that you're working with that are lead generation, do you find that you've been able to either guide them or they already had this information where you were able to provide conversion value for either, whatever happens after the sale? So like how efficient have you been able to go with them? Like, have you been able to get them to buy into offline conversions so that if they have registrations, they can follow through and then start using conversion value? or is that something you still find very challenging with your clients?
Yeah, so for obviously it's easy for e-commerce because we get the values. For lead gen, it is a lot harder, and it does come down to the client and how sophisticated they are. Again, small businesses will tend to struggle to input this data because it's often a manual thing. They have to go through their CRM and put their, the book the sales and so on. And if you're a small company, handful of people,
Don't really have a
it
CRM.
can feel like admin.
Yeah.
So, however, on the other side, we've got bigger clients, again, in insurance, for example, where we do literally track the quote, so the lead. We then track internally, they track the quote to application. So essentially, when a lead becomes qualified, which is super important. And then finally, there are actually sometimes multiple more steps, but finally it comes out as a policy. So that's the actual sale value. And some of them even give you the essentially the profit and not the revenue. And those are re-uploaded to Google offline data as secondary conversions. So we don't bid against them, but we do check them monthly to see what's the ratio of leads to applications. So essentially conversions in the eyes of Google compared to qualified conversions. So what's that ratio? Is it 70%? Is it 80%? And we can essentially use that number to help us manage the bids and budget. And it is manual, but it's a worthwhile task once a month, to be fair, or bi-weekly.
Gotcha. I would agree with that. So I would say in those cases for us, it's still very similar. So very similar situation. Some of the smaller clients we'll work with, they may not have a CRM yet. Some of our mid-sized to large clients, they might tell me, I remember I had a call with a client the other day and they're just like, oh, well, what happens is like our team is not really updating the CRM for us. Like we've tried to get them to update the CRM and they don't and stuff like that. So it gets a little tricky for them. So I would say that's kind of the biggest difference in between sort of choosing your bidding strategy. So if you're on the lead gen side, you're probably going to go with something along the lines of that target CPA. If the campaign is geared towards driving those registrations or those contact forms or those conversions. So if you're running that search campaign or your PMAX, that'd probably be something you would do. Whereas you might focus on maximize conversion value for some sort of an e-commerce business. Again, if you have a short cycle for your if you're in the lead generation, you can probably get away with trying maximize conversion value if you have the data, but more often than not, it gets a little bit trickier to do than that. And just remember, make sure that if you are starting to track conversion value, quick tip, make sure you don't switch right away. So just like Ed said, for instance, they started tracking offline conversions and they were keeping that as a secondary, not immediately switching it to primary just because you think it's relevant. So I think as a rule of thumb, if you don't have enough of those like conversion value or those conversions have conversion value within the period of time, or the time lag is too much, like you're looking at maybe 30-day time lag for those conversions, definitely they probably should stay as secondary as opposed to primary, right?
Yeah, so this is my issue with doing value-based bidding. The time lag is a significant issue because Google struggles with tracking at the best of times. So yeah, time lag's a nightmare, and also sufficient data. And so we've tested value-based bidding over the years, and I know like one of our clients got hundreds of policies coming in each week, so actual revenue values, and thousands of quotes on the front end. We could not get value-based bidding to outperform a simple target CPA. So we went through all this pain and headache and suffering, only to find out, you know what, it didn't work as a bidding strategy. Just stick to target CPA, and then we will manually review the actual revenue and policy data ourselves to steer where we put the budget and how we tweak the bidding.
I think that's a good point. And just having all the different data points helps you, right? So whether you get that conversion value in Google or you just see it directly from the client, through some sort of a spreadsheet or whatever, you can still determine whether you're progressing month over month and then make your decisions. You can still try to allocate more budget if over time that conversion value, so to speak, is increasing, right? And if it's not, then obviously you can make the adjustments that you see fit. So I think that's a pretty good way to close this one. And again, we're not really going into like video campaigns here. Obviously, you have some additional bidding options such as CPM or just cost per views. So I would say for video campaigns for the most part, do you have any tips, Ed, on how to manage your video or your demand gens? Like, what do you typically see on those kinds of campaigns?
Yeah, it's really simple. YouTube ads, it's really simple. It's not even 80-20, it's like 90-10 or 95-5. The video, the advert is all the work. You can do whatever you want inside Google Ads. If your video ad is not to scratch and it doesn't hit the mark, it will not perform. If you've got a really good video ad, you can just let Google work it out. Video is one of the areas where Google's automations is actually quite good. If you give it a good advert, it will do most of the work for you. So yeah, I focus on the video, essentially, not the Google ads.
That's good.
Cheats answer.
So we're going to go through a couple of these slides. I would say we have a question on the chat, so I think this is a good slide to sort of roll that in. But why don't we talk about switching from manual bidding over to your automated bidding strategy? Like, have you had to deal with any clients that were spending, let's say, a significant amount of money and they were still doing manual bidding, and you kind of help them through that transition? Like, can you think of any story like that?
Yeah, we haven't had to transition manual for years, but I actually took some notes because I went back over this to look at what we did. I think the last one was last year. We do still have some clients on manual, but these are so I don't know if anyone's familiar with John Moran. He's another Google ads nerd, and we actually went back to manual because of some of the stuff that he's been discovering, which is essentially, and I don't want to get too advanced or complicated, and this is really risky, removing conversion tracking and essentially blinding Google and using a third-party tracker. So we're actually experimenting with some of that. I can talk more about that at the end. It's quite interesting. But moving to manual, yeah, so we moved to manual once we had enough conversion data. So I remember one specifically. I made some notes on a fencing contractor in the UK, about 5 to 5 grand spend. Excuse me, had about 50 conversions a month, and yeah, we literally divided the budget by the amount of conversions, set a target CPA, and let it do its thing. So like really basic, nothing fancy. And on some of the campaigns, we actually set the target CPA higher than the daily budget of the campaign, which makes it sound broken, but it still works. Because a lot of people are like, oh, my target CPA might be 50, but on that campaign, I can only afford $30 a day. Does it work? It's not ideal, but it can still work. It sort of averages out over the week and the month. So like really simple. If you've got the conversion data, you can see what your cost conversion is, set your target CPA. I've made a note here, bid a little bit more aggressive to start with. So don't try and be cheap is my probably key takeaway. So don't go, oh, I've been getting conversions for $20. I'm going to set my target CPA at 15. I'd go the other way. I'd give it a little bit of headroom to start with, and then bring that target CPA down, and then down and down.
I like that tip. I like that tip. And I've seen it a few times, maybe not specifically with transitions from manual bid, but speaking of very similar things where, you're saying here with the caveat, like if you have conversion data, right, which should be a prerequisite for most people. I still imagine there are some few folks that, either have not been able to set up conversions, or they have, but they just have like the basic Google conversions. Let's say your click to call. So they have that one, which, you don't really have to install any tracking pixels or anything like that. And maybe they have, I don't know, 4 to 5 conversions in the last 30 days. Do you have any tips for those where they might not be fully there just yet? Or on the flip side to that again, let me just kind of close it there, and then I have a follow-up question that I think is very interesting.
Okay. What do you do if you've got no conversion data? It's really difficult. So I've seen this work when I've seen it work with single campaign accounts. So you've got a very specific thing, skip hire, where literally they've got 5 keywords and they're doing local skip hire, and they don't care about conversion tracking because they know when they turn the ads on for those specific keywords, the phone rings or they get quotes. Not everyone's that fortunate. So I think you've got to look at some kind of tracking. So some kind of UTMs or get a developer to I'm thinking about some of our clients. I mean, you can go really advanced. You can do server-side tracking. So you can send people to a specific URL that redirects to your landing page, and you cookie people based on that URL. So you know which campaign they got sent to. So then when they add their details to the quote form, the cookie fills in a hidden field to say it was this campaign name. That's more advanced. And then I'm thinking, hold on, if that's advanced, if someone hasn't got conversion tracking, why? I guess the root cause, why have you not got conversion tracking? What's stopping you? Is it because you can't build it into your website? And then it's a question of, okay, do we need a different platform that supports Google Ads if we're going to use Google Ads going forwards? Because otherwise, the only thing you can really do is 1 week put the budget up and see if you get more leads or more sales, and then turn the budget down another week and see if it negatively impacts the business. That's literally what no tracking is. It's seeing inputs and outputs.
Right.
It's not a great way to run ads, but yeah, I mean, how do you do it without tracking? It's really difficult.
Yes.
Manual bids. You have to do manual bids.
I would probably agree with that. I think that the key component here is track something, whatever you can, as close as possible as you can, because the common challenges I see with tracking with people is like, oh, we have this like third-party tool that uses this on the website, so we can't really measure it or whatever that might be. So what you're saying, to recap on your explanation, would be that if for some odd reason you don't have conversions, try to figure out a way to get them. Like that'd be the number one option. And then as a fallback, perhaps you can stick to manual until you're able to figure that one out, because otherwise, what are you going to do? Maximize clicks maybe, and then gosh, there goes
yeah. So it's risk, isn't it? So yeah, it's stepping back. It's like, okay, is my business reliant on Google Ads? Does it drive customers? If it's a yes, then what are you going to do if Google removes manual bidding? It's a risk. So then you have to say, well, is Google Ads and tracking more important than the thing that's stopping me using the tracking? And if that's because you've got some funky website or some old website, can you migrate to a different platform? It's just risk analysis. Not that you should be entirely reliant on Google Ads, but unfortunately, a lot of businesses are.
Right. Awesome. Thank you for the answers on that one. And so once you have your bidding strategy, here are some of the different ways in which you can analyze your bidding strategy. So let's talk about some of the things that you could potentially look into. What is your actual CPA? What has been the average CPA over a period of time? How has it been kind of changing over time? So you can always modify this and make some adjustments. But speaking in general around tracking and monitoring the performance of your bidding strategy, what are some of the things you would look forward to? Like, do you find yourself going through this portfolio bidding strategy status report, or do you typically find that you don't really go in here and you more so focus on, actual performance of the campaign, and then you adjust as based on that? I'm curious to hear what you would typically do.
Yeah. So crikey, it's so nuanced because it depends on so many things. But if essentially you're trying to spend your budget, and you're able to spend your budget, so whatever that might be, 100, 500, 50,000 a day.
Right.
So then your goal, if it is just volume of conversions, volume of sales, is to maximize that budget. And sometimes setting bids is not the most precise way to do it in terms of using the blended view in portfolios. a better way to look at it is to go back over the account and segment by time, to review each day to see what your budget was set at and how close you got to hitting your budget.
Okay.
So if you've got $100 a day and you constantly hit $70 or $80, but you can afford to spend $100 and you need to make more sales or conversions, then that's a clear sign that you need to raise your target CPA or you need to lower your ROAS. It's as simple as that. You're essentially trying to find that sweet spot in your bid where you can maximize your daily conversion, daily spend. So it is that simple. It's that harmony between budget and bids. And a lot of people do want to spend their daily.
Right. And I think that's a really interesting approach. I was just looking at a campaign the other day, and we were looking at some of the days where it would typically be more impactful for their business. Like this is a restaurant, and they were running on, you know, all 7 days a week, but obviously their peak days are weekends, so Saturday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And you could see that looking at the segment by day, that on day of the week of those specific Friday, Saturday, Sunday, they were really missing out on their spend mark. And you were like, why? Like they're meeting budget on all the other days except for these 3 days. And they were spending about maybe half of the budget, and they were losing out on rank. You know, when you started to add the columns in. So that'd be an interesting situation where you could potentially adjust that target CPA, potentially bring that up maybe, and
Yeah,
you could be just a little bit more aggressive.
yeah. So ad rank's a tricky one because you then your goalposts start to widen, narrow, or move depending on what you do elsewhere. So, of course, if your keyword selection changes, you completely change the auction. So your ad ranks, your impression share, it changes.
Right.
And same of negatives as well. So I think there's a slide at the end about portfolio bids that I want to talk about how we set them up and use them. So I won't spend too much time on this, but it can be a moving target. And actually, sometimes when I've reviewed accounts, the simplest thing is to essentially downsize the account, less keywords, less ad groups to improve performance. Sometimes people have too big of a campaign with hundreds, thousands of keywords. Half of them not spending, a third of them are competing with each other. And sometimes it's just like, right, what's my top 20, 30% converting stuff? That stays in this campaign. Everything else gets copied to a new campaign with less budget. Let's really maximize the bids on the stuff that's working. It's simple. Like, it's simple principles. It's just being told to do it and reminding yourself that sometimes simpler is better with these things. I've learned that a lot over the past 15 years. Sometimes the simpler stuff it's too obvious, but it works.
And I feel like, speaking on the agency side, some people I've met, they feel guilty with sometimes trying to keep it simple. You know what I mean? Like, I think there's like some people deal with that kind of that anxiety of like, oh man, I need to probably do some things on here or do more. And I think that's a very interesting statement.
And yeah, to be fair, to anyone that's a freelancer here, or an agency, or even in-house, I think it's reasonable to have a checklist that you go and work through, and you can show to your client or your boss, look, this is what I work through, and this is what I'm doing. Just because I'm not pressing a button inside Google Ads doesn't mean that I'm not running through these checks to ensure that this ship is sailing straight, because that's what you're paying me for. You're not paying me to click buttons, you're paying me for the results. So I always focus people looking ahead and not at, well, what have you done today? What have you done this week? It's like, well, I've done my job, which is getting the results.
And I think what we could do is we can move forward into some of the challenges and solutions, just being a little bit mindful of time. I think we have maybe 15 more minutes, so we can jump into a couple of things around challenges and solutions. Time flies, let me tell you, Ed. It's lovely to talk to you.
I think there's a couple of comments as well.
Yeah. It's I want to make sure we leave some time for that. And so we're going to maybe just run through some of the challenges you typically deal with bidding strategies. Obviously, like we were just saying, sometimes you feel like you don't have a lot of control because you can't change too many things. And so understand that that's okay. And really, as long as you're kind of driving that performance forward overall, then you're in a good place. And also understand, like, sometimes even when performance drops a bit from like month over month, I try to think of like big picture too. We deal with a lot of clients that are very seasonal. So don't always evaluate, month over month as opposed to maybe year over year. And that might be kind of an interesting way to understand whether this performance decrease was actually pretty much in line with what their season looks like as well. And so again, don't feel too guilty if you're not changing your bidding strategy all the time. And that's
Plan
okay.
ahead. You make a really valid point. Seasonal, well, seasonality affects even most accounts that think that aren't seasonal. Again, simple. Just look at the data ahead. So we're in October now. So don't look back. Look at last year's October and November to see what's coming. How did the account perform going into this period? Because a lot of people compare the last 30 days versus last year's 30 days. But you constantly got your head in the past. It's like, well, what humps are going to appear in the very near future? So remember that. Simple analysis, but I don't see a lot of people doing it.
That's a great point. And perfect timing for that, because we're looking at right now that October, November season, right? Very, very heavily influenced with spend, especially, I guess, on the e-commerce side. Maybe lead
Yep.
gen may not be that case, but nevertheless, keep that in mind for anyone that's here joining us today. Obviously, bidding strategy is going to rely on data. We just talked about that and how it's a very big challenge. If you do not have conversion tracking, you're basically handicapped. So if you're a business owner listening to us today, invest money on making sure you have a good website that is able to measure and send data back, not only just for Google, but just with any vendor you're working with. So if you're using Meta, you want to be able to track your conversions. If you're using Amazon, if you're using anything else, like being able to measure what you do, that's the whole thing. And that's the whole reason we're doing digital, because it's measurable. So not measuring, it's kind of a cardinal sin, so to speak, right? So it's not super expensive to invest in doing that. And I would even argue, like you very well said, Ed, that the cost of not doing it is probably greater than the cost of doing it, right? In order to do whatever it takes to start measuring. So I just sort of keep that in mind. It's really great, and it will pay off even in the short and midterm. So I would say that's it's important to measure your data, right? And I think you had a slide here on how to manage some portfolio bidding. So if you want to talk about that one and share some insights.
Yeah, because not a lot of people use portfolio bids. So you don't have to use a portfolio, but essentially if you've got think of a specific scenario. If you're in lead gen and you've got 3 services split across 3 campaigns, excuse me, then you've got a low, you haven't got a massive budget, you don't spend a huge amount, maybe a couple of grand a month, and you've got, I don't know, 15 conversions and they're spread across 3 or 4 campaigns. The data's really thin, and the smart bidding, not the automated, the smart bidding struggles with that level of data, or it can be really choppy. Hence portfolio. So you bring all that campaign data together in a portfolio. It shares all the conversion data and you bid against it. So but what you need to do is set a maximum bid, or you should set a maximum bid. So this is how you control click inflation as well. And this sort of covers off 2 topics. So an account with less data using portfolio, and then what do we do when we've got high CPCs? You can use a portfolio bid as well, because of course when you've got target CPA or maximize conversions, you can't set a bid, but portfolios enable you to set a bid. And some people don't realize that. So it's like, oh, you can actually control the ultimate bidding. 10 minutes left. Yeah, I know. Sorry, I talk too much. Anyway, so right. How do we find an optimal bid, shall we say? Because it's all well and good saying, okay, so I'm going to move to portfolio bids because I need to bring all that data into one place. What do we set the max bid at? And I think I put a slide in on the next slide, I think.
Yeah, see, yeah.
Yes, you can tell it's my slide because it looks rubbish compared to the professional presentation. So essentially, how do you find a max bid? Again, it's not difficult. You go into the campaign that the campaigns that you want to combine into a portfolio, look at your search terms report, apply look back at least 90 days, depending on how seasonal you are. So if you're not super seasonal, well, I'm just thinking something, well, plumbers are seasonal. But if you're not super seasonal, you can use longer data. You can use the whole year. Use your brain on that one. Apply filters to get rid of your zero conversions and zero click data. Sort by average CPC. This is where you might get a slight heart attack and you might find some CPCs that are really high. If you take off the zero conversion filter, you might see even higher click costs, which is just waste. And then you're literally looking, can I afford, at that average click, can I afford the cost conversion, the CPA? And if you can't, then you can't bid that high. So lower click counts are not ideal. I mean, you could change the filter to say 5 clicks, so you get a bit more data through here. So essentially, we're looking for the highest bid where a cost conversion is realistic to your business. And on here, it might be, I could deal with 30, what is this, euros. So I'd set my bid somewhere in the region of 25 euros as my max bid. So essentially, you're trying to look for the 95% conversions that come through at an affordable bid. And it means you will lose some that are expensive, but that will keep you, essentially, it will not throttle the system too much. Because if you just go in and go, oh, I'm just going to set a bid that's like, oh, 15, that'll do, won't it? That'll just massively throttle the bidding engine. So you want to be as close as you can get to like 90 to 100% if you can get there of your affordability. I hope that makes sense. Use your search term data essentially to set a bid.
I think it's interesting that you filtered out the clicks. I mean the traffic that didn't have any conversions to figure out that CPA, because typically speaking, you would normally see people include those, and so your CPA is a little higher because obviously it's going to have some more cost into that. So I think it's an interesting approach to that.
Yeah, you don't want to be, and again, this is nuanced because some of those clicks may eventually turn into conversions. 1 click, 2 click, zero conversion search terms, they might eventually convert. If you've got infinite budget or a massive budget, then you can include them. But most people want to be efficient, which means get rid of the waste, and then you can always come back and up your bid and interpret some of that data.
Perfect. So we'll run through some questions, and then if we have more time, we can maybe talk about something else. But question number one is along the lines of, since we talk about manual CPC, this viewer wants to know, what would be your take on using manual CPC for branded campaigns?
So, well, it depends. Do you want to do the work? So manual is just, you're doing the work. So is it going to save you time to move to automated bidding? If not, then you can stick with manual. I guess the question is, why are you using manual for brand? Is it because you want to not overpay, perhaps, if you're in a really competitive market and target impressions would ramp up your bids? Then yeah, stick to manual. I still worry about being too reliant on manual though, because the future is probably Google removing it maybe next year. Who knows? So yeah, it's a bit nuanced, but if you're doing it to control bids, I understand. But you could, in theory, I think it's true, you can add a single campaign to a portfolio bid. So in theory, you could set a max bid with an automated bidding strategy for your branded campaign. But if currently you don't have to do a lot of work with the manual bids, i.e. you just set a bid and walk away, you'd be all right.
Yeah, I would say my bet would probably be on those two. So either I'm going to do the target impression share, or I'm going to do that target CPA and set that portfolio so I can do the CPC cap, probably something like that. That would be what I would do. On the second question we have, let's say you're using target CPA And how would you know if the target CPA you've set is affecting your ad rank or your ranking in general, your ability to show?
I first ask, does it matter? So
Great comeback question.
yeah, does it?
Let's
Well, this
think
is the problem
about
because
that.
yeah, so auction insights and the auction metrics can be a bit of a chasing your tail situation. So if you're getting enough conversions and you're spending your budget, then don't worry about ad rank. If you can't spend your budget and you're not getting enough conversions, then obviously there is a bidding issue. And it's as simple as that, segmenting by day, just looking at how close am I getting to my daily spend. If you're, you've set your daily budget to $100 and you're spending 50, 40, 55, then yeah, your bids are too restrictive. Or there's something else in that campaign that you need to get rid of, move into another campaign to maximize the area that is converting that you want to get more ad rank to. Essentially, it's simplification sometimes.
I think that's a great point. And I was just talking to a few of our new folks, and we were just going over how the impression share metrics are obviously very helpful, and they give you really good context. But just because you have a relatively high, lost a rank or whatever that might be, or it's not inherently a bad thing as long as, again, you're still hitting your budget, you're still getting your conversions, then you can turn it into a good thing. Maybe try to ask for some again, if you have a little bit of leeway on the budget, then you can ask for more budget if you're already spending it, if the conversion is good. So but I would just definitely say, just because a specific metric in a vacuum does not look good, it doesn't mean it's a bad thing, especially because metrics in themselves in a specific vacuum is not how you want to look at it, right? So overall, what does a client want? What is the client's goals? Is that CPA hitting those goals? And then are we really using our budget consistently? Then phenomenal. You have nothing to worry about, I would say, in the general sense.
Same goes for quality score. If I'm spending the budget and my target CPA is where I want it to be or less, why do I care if my quality score is not 10? I don't.
Are you a big proponent of ad strength excellent?
What's that?
Are you big on monitoring the ad strength for your ad copy?
No. I'm about the end result because, like you mentioned, the metrics. The prime example, auction insights, you can get a competitor turn up that doesn't even do what you're bidding on. Like Amazon and eBay are prime examples. They often end up in an auction that they shouldn't be in, and they are inflating the numbers. They are changing the metrics, even though they have little to no bearing on your outcome, other than frustrating you because you lost out on potentially a click. But yeah, they don't impact the business goal, but they do impact the auction metrics, which are doing this. So yeah.
So to everyone that joined us today and everyone that's actually listening to the recording afterwards, thank you so much for paying attention to Ed and I. It's been great talking to you, Ed. Before we go, can you let us know where can people find you? Can you give us a shout out to your website or anything that you would like for people to know?
Sure. I just wanted to apologize. Hopefully it came across okay, but it was a bit choppy for me on and off, so it was distracting me a bit. So hopefully I wasn't choppy. It might be my end. Yeah, you can just go to edleake.com. On there, there's actually, I think you're going to link to it. There's a free download about smart bidding. It's literally a flow chart how to use smart bidding and diagnose issues with it. So if I didn't answer the question today, I've literally put a free piece of training together for smart bidding.
Perfect. Thank you so much once again, Ed. It's been a pleasure. I think you were phenomenal. Actually, thank you to everyone for tuning in today. We'll be sharing more info and the recording after the fact. Once again, go ahead and make sure you focus on the end result of your clients. That is the one thing that matters. And if you're hitting goals and you're spending your budget, you'll be great. So have a great day, everyone. Thank you so much. We'll see you soon.